The desert wind carried no song that morning, only silence, thick as judgment. Elias Boone reined in his mule, the leather creaking under his weight, eyes narrowing on a sight that did not belong to the living. Beneath the twisted arms of an ancient cottonwood, a girl dangled by her wrists, rope biting deep into sun-darkened skin. Her toes scraped helplessly at the cracked earth, chest rising only in shallow gasps. Blood streaked her tangled black hair. Her head hung forward, as if the desert itself had pressed down on her. Above her swayed a crude wooden sign, letters slashed in angry red paint. "White man, don't forgive." For a long breath, Boone did not move. He had seen bodies before. The war had filled his eyes with enough ghosts to last 3 lifetimes. But this was different. This was not justice. It was a warning nailed to a living soul. The mule shuddered beneath him, ears twitching, uneasy. Boone felt his own chest tighten the same way. He whispered under his breath, words that rose unbidden, words he had once carried into battle when everything else had failed. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." The psalm steadied his hand. He swung down from the saddle. Dust crunched under his boots. With slow, deliberate steps, he approached the tree. The girl stirred faintly, her lips cracked, her breathing ragged. Her eyes opened, dark, wild, burning with something he could not yet name. Boone pulled the hunting knife from his belt, its edge dulled from years of fence work and hide cutting. One swift stroke severed the rope. The girl collapsed into his arms like a rag soaked in heat and pain. She weighed almost nothing, as if the desert had already stripped her of all but the will to cling to breath. He cradled her against his chest, feeling the shallow beat of her heart. He did not ask questions, not yet. Instead, he wrapped her in his coat, lifted her onto the mule's back, and led the way home, his boots sinking into the red dust. Overhead, the sky held its breath, clouds crawling low as if watching. Boone Ranch was no palace. Just a 3-room cabin with a slanted roof, a corral with half-broken fencing, and a windmill that moaned in the night like a widow in mourning. Yet it was shelter, and for now it was all he could offer. He laid her on his own bed, dampened a cloth, and cleaned her wounds as gently as his calloused hands could manage. He spooned water past her lips, drop by drop. She flinched at his touch, but did not fight. She did not speak either. Her silence was heavy, older than her years, the silence of someone who had seen too much. Boone sat by the fire that night, rifle leaning at his side. The desert was never short of enemies, and whoever had left that sign on the cottonwood tree was not finished. He stared at the flames, hearing again the echo of his own prayer, "God help me." And for the first time in many years, he wondered if God had truly sent him someone to save, or someone to judge. Morning broke slow and pale over the Boone Ranch. The desert stretched endless and empty, but inside the cabin, the sound of shallow breathing filled the silence. Boone had dragged his chair close to the bedside. Through the night, he had risen often, spooning water into her lips, laying cool cloths across her fevered brow. The girl slept fitfully, her wrists raw and swollen, her skin marked with bruises that told more stories than her mouth ever could. Boone was no stranger to wounds, but these were the kind that went deeper than flesh. He knew the war had left such scars on men, the kind no doctor could dress. Outside, the windmill moaned, long and low, like the cry of a widow. It was the only song the desert gave him, and for years he had lived with it, alone and unchallenged. Now every sound seemed different, charged with the presence of this broken stranger who lay in his bed. He rose at dawn, fed the mule, threw hay for the cattle, and mended a fence post that had leaned too long in the wind. Habit steadied him. Habit was all that had kept him alive since Appomattox. But that morning, when he stepped back into the cabin, he felt her eyes on him. They were open now, dark, sharp, watching him with the wary gaze of a hawk. She said nothing, only tracked his every move. He offered her water again. She took it, though her hands trembled so badly he had to guide the tin cup to her mouth. A few drops spilled down her chin. Boone wiped them away with the corner of his sleeve. "You'll live," he said quietly, as though speaking it aloud might convince them both. No reply came, only the hollow crackle of the fire. Days passed. She never spoke. She never tried to leave. She ate little, slept much, and stared often at the wooden beams above her as if they hid secrets. Boone called her Birdie, after the way he had found her hanging like a broken-winged creature from that tree. She did not nod, nor did she object. He took her silence as permission. At night, Boone slept lightly by the fire, rifle always within reach. He kept one ear on the ridgeline, listening for riders, for boots in the dust, for the return of whoever had left her to die. And still the question gnawed at him. Why her? Why here? Why that message carved in red? "White man, don't forgive." He thought of the war again, of the villages burned in its wake. Not just of soldiers in blue or gray, but of innocent families caught in the tide. He thought of the orders he had followed, the silence he had kept, the shame that clung to him like burrs on a horse's mane. The girl slept then, curled beneath his coat, her breath shallow but steady. Boone sat in the flickering firelight, his hand resting heavy on the worn leather of the Bible tucked inside his satchel. He had not opened it in years, not since he'd laid down his uniform. But tonight, its weight pressed against him, steady and certain, like the voice of a God he had tried hard to forget. If you found this helpful, a quick like really helps us keep creating. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. The desert had always been a land of silence, but now the hush carried a different weight. Elias Boone moved about his cabin with the steady rhythm of habit, tending the mule, checking the cattle, patching the leaky roof, but every sound seemed sharpened by the presence of the girl lying on his bed. She did not speak. Her lips remained cracked, her throat raw, her eyes often closed. But when they opened, dark and watchful, Boone felt as though the whole desert had eyes on him. He fed her in small measures, a spoonful of broth, a slice of cornbread softened with water. Sometimes she turned her face away, sometimes she allowed him to help. Each act of care felt like a negotiation with her silence. At night, Boone dragged his chair near the hearth and kept the rifle within reach. He listened to the shifting winds outside, half expecting hoofbeats or voices to break through the dark. Whoever had hung her from that tree had done it for a reason. They would not simply forget. On the second day, she stirred while he was boiling coffee. He turned to see her sitting up, wrapped tight in the wool blanket he had given her. She did not look at him but at the small window, where the light of morning spilled across the floorboards. Boone offered her the cup of water he always kept nearby. She took it without a word, drinking with trembling hands. "You'll live," he said softly, almost to himself. She set the cup down. Her eyes lingered on him for the first time, as if measuring whether those words were truth or false comfort. He tried to fill the silence with simple work. Mornings meant chores, chopping wood, hauling buckets from the well, repairing the sagging corral fence. He spoke little, but sometimes he muttered to himself the way a man does when he has forgotten the sound of conversation. In those moments, he felt her eyes on him again, studying. By the fourth day, her strength began to return. She rose to her feet shakily, clutching the wall for balance. Boone stepped forward, ready to catch her, but she waved him off with a glare sharp enough to cut. He nodded and stepped back, letting her claim those first steps on her own. It was then he gave her the name. "Birdie," he said one morning while laying a bowl of stew beside her. "That's what I'll call you, like a bird in a snare." She did not answer, but she did not reject it either. He took her silence as permission. And so they lived in that uneasy rhythm. He spoke only when necessary, and she replied only with her eyes. He gave her food, water, warmth. She gave him nothing but questions he could not yet voice aloud. At night, as he stared into the fire, Boone felt the weight of a psalm pressing against his memory, though he did not speak it aloud this time. "Be still, and know that I am God." Perhaps the stillness was not only hers, but his own, a silence that demanded reckoning. And in that silence, the bond between a broken man and a broken girl began to take root, as fragile as desert grass pushing through stone. It was near dusk when the silence finally cracked. The desert sky bled orange and violet, the kind of twilight that always reminded Elias Boone of fields left behind in Virginia, of smoke hanging after battles best forgotten. He sat by the window with his knife and whetstone, dragging the blade across with slow, steady strokes. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost soothing. Behind him, the girl shifted beneath her blanket. The fire popped, throwing sparks against the stones. Boone did not turn, thinking she was only restless again. Then he heard it, a voice, thin and brittle, but steady enough to cut through the hush. Why? The single word hung in the air like a bell's last echo. Boone froze, knife paused mid-stroke. He turned slowly. She was upright now, dark hair falling tangled around her face, her eyes locked on him with a sharpness he hadn't seen before. "Why? Did you cut me down?" she pressed, her voice cracked but certain. Boone set the knife aside. For a moment he simply looked at her, studying the question on her face. Then he said, plain and steady, "Because no one deserves to die that way, not even a stranger." Her jaw tightened. "Even an Apache?" The firelight flickered across her features, shadows rising and falling like battle lines. Boone stood, walked to the stove, poured himself a cup of coffee he didn't want. His voice was low when it came. "Especially an Apache." The silence that followed was not the same silence of before. It was alive now, filled with the weight of something unspoken. She looked away, her fingers knotting the edge of the blanket, but Boone saw the way her shoulders shifted, as though she carried one stone less than before. That night, the wind clawed at the cabin walls, but the quiet inside held. Boone stretched out by the fire, rifle close as always. He thought of her words, sharp, defiant, born of pain. He thought of his own answer, and how true it had felt on his tongue. In the middle of the night, he stirred and found her awake, eyes wide open in the dim glow. She was staring at the ceiling beams, lips moving silently. He wondered if she prayed, though not to the same God he had once called upon. For a moment, he wanted to ask. But the question stayed locked behind his teeth. By morning, she was already sitting up when he brought her water. She drank without his help this time, though her hands still trembled. Boone noticed, but said nothing. Words had already been spoken. He did not want to press for more. Out by the corral, as he hammered a loose board into place, he caught himself thinking about the way she had asked. Straight, without begging, without fear. It had not been a plea, it had been a challenge. He realized then that she was no longer just a burden he had taken in. She was a storm waiting to break. And when it did, he would have to decide whether to stand in its path or alongside it. The telling came slowly, like a wound reopening. For days she had held her silence, giving him nothing but the weight of her gaze. But on the seventh evening, when the desert had gone dark and the only light came from the fire licking at the logs, her voice returned, soft, broken, yet heavy with truth. "My people," she began, then stopped, as though the words themselves were sharp stones she had to carry on her tongue. Her eyes drifted to the flames. "They did not want war. We lived near the river, where the cottonwoods grew tall. The soldiers said we must leave, but my father told them no. He said the land was the bones of our grandfathers." Boone listened in silence, the cup of coffee cooling in his hands. She drew in a shaking breath. "One morning, riders came, not just soldiers, settlers too. They carried rifles and torches. The sky filled with smoke before the sun was even high. They killed the old first, the ones too slow to run. Then the women, then the children. They called it justice." Her voice cracked. But it was fire, only fire. Boone's jaw tightened. He knew of such raids. Camp Grant, Arizona, April 1871. The papers had called it a victory. Men had come home boasting. But he remembered the whispers among soldiers who had seen the truth, how it was slaughter, not battle. "I ran," she whispered. "I ran into the hills. My brothers tried to follow, but—" Her throat closed around the words. She turned her face away, but Boone could still see the tears cutting down her dust-streaked cheeks. "They found me days later," she said at last. "Tied me to that tree, put that sign above me. They said I killed a scout. I never saw him."
Never touched him, but they wanted someone to blame. The fire snapped, spitting sparks into the shadows. Boone stared into the flames, the weight of her words pressing hard on his chest. He had seen orders carried out like that before. Villages emptied, homes set to flame, and afterward men in blue or gray telling themselves it was necessary. He wanted to speak, to say something that could close the wound she had torn open, but no words came. What comfort could a soldier give to the orphan of a war she had never chosen? Iana lifted her eyes to him then. They burned through the dim light, dark and fierce despite the tears. "Tell me, rancher, when they kill your family, when they burn your home, who do you pray to?" The question struck like a bullet. Boone gripped the tin cup tighter, knuckles white, but he did not answer. Not yet. Instead, he bowed his head, the old verse echoing unbidden through his mind. "The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 34:18. He did not speak it aloud, but for the first time in years, he believed it might still be true. It was a week after she first told her story when the next truth surfaced. The nights had grown colder, the desert air carrying a bite that seeped through the cabin walls. Boone had lit the fire high, its glow flickering across the shelves and the rough-hewn mantel above. Iana sat near the window, her blanket wrapped tight, eyes tracing the shadows that stretched along the floor. Boone stood by the hearth, staring into the flames as though they held answers. Then, with a quiet heaviness, he reached behind a loose brick in the wall and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He laid it on the table between them. Her eyes narrowed. Slowly, she unwrapped the blanket from her shoulders and stepped closer. She picked it up with shaking hands, smoothing the creases. The drawing stared back at her, crude lines but unmistakable. Sharp cheekbones, wild eyes. Her own face captured in ink and accusation. Across the top, wanted, dead or alive. Below, the promise, $100 reward. She looked up at him, firelight flickering across her dark eyes. "You knew?" she whispered. Boone nodded once. "From the day I cut you down." Her breath caught, ragged and hot. "Then why didn't you turn me in?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he poured himself a measure of coffee gone cold and let it sit untouched in his hand. Finally, he spoke. "Because I've seen what they call justice out here." His gaze shifted to hers, steady, unflinching. "And it wears the wrong man's face more often than not." The words hung between them, heavier than the silence that followed. She gripped the paper tighter, her knuckles whitening. "They will come for me," she said. "They already are," Boone replied. His eyes burned with something between defiance and shame. "But I won't be the one who delivers you." Iana sank back into the chair by the window, the poster still clutched in her hands. For the first time since he had known her, her lips curled, not into a smile, but into something closer to disbelief. "You risk your life, your home, for a stranger? For someone the world calls guilty?" Boone turned back to the fire. His voice was low, more to himself than to her. "If we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive us and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness." 1 John 1:9. She tilted her head. "What did you say?" "Something my mother used to read," Boone muttered. He took a long breath.
"I reckon I've got sins enough to confess. And if there's any forgiveness left in this world, I'd rather spend it here, keeping you from that rope again, than handing you over to men who don't know the meaning of mercy." The fire snapped loud, filling the silence his words left behind. For the first time, she did not look at him with suspicion. She looked at him as though seeing a man not hiding her, but standing with her. The wanted poster slipped from her hand, drifting to the floor, where the flame's glow licked its edges but did not burn it. The first thunder came like a cannon shot rolling across the desert. Elias Boone had been mending a saddle strap when the sound rattled through the cabin walls. The mule in the corral kicked against its stall, nostrils flaring at the sudden violence in the sky. Boone glanced at the window. Dark clouds were piling high, bruised purple and black, rolling in from the mountains. The desert did not often give rain, but when it did, it came with fury. Lightning cracked, splitting the horizon in two. The cabin shook as rain hammered down, heavy and merciless. Boone set aside his tools and moved to secure the shutters, but a sound from behind froze him. Ayanna was no longer in her chair. He found her crouched beneath the table, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes wide with terror. Her whole body shook, as though the storm outside had taken hold of her bones. Boone crouched low, his broad frame filling the space beside her. "It's just rain," he said softly. "Storm will pass." She shook her head, words spilling out fractured and panicked. "Not all storms pass, not all." Her voice broke into a whisper, half English, half Apache, the cadence of old prayers. Boone did not understand the words, but he understood the sound. It was the sound of someone reliving fire and gunfire, the sound of horses screaming, of villages burning. He had heard it before, in men broken by war. He reached out slowly, resting a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here," he murmured. "Ain't no soldiers, no torches, just thunder." Her breathing was ragged, shallow. Another crack of lightning split the sky, and she flinched so hard she nearly knocked her head against the table. Boone shifted closer, his arm coming around her as naturally as drawing breath. For a moment she resisted, stiff and trembling. Then, as the rain poured harder, she let herself lean against him, her forehead pressing into his chest. They stayed that way, two broken lives holding against the storm. Boone stared into the dark cabin, feeling her heartbeat flutter against his ribs. "I've seen storms," he said after a long silence, his voice low and steady. "Seen them take fields, homes, men. Thought they'd take me too, but they didn't. I'm still here." He tightened his arm slightly, grounding her. "And you are too. That means something." She lifted her face, eyes glistening with tears and lightning. "What does it mean?" Boone met her gaze, the weight of his words drawn from years of loss and guilt. "It means God ain't done with us yet." For the first time she did not look away. The storm outside raged, but between them a fragile calm took hold. By the time the rain eased and the thunder rolled farther off, she had fallen asleep against him, breath soft and steady. Boone did not move. He let her rest, the firelight flickering across her face. When at last he carried her back to the bed, he whispered a verse his mother had once spoken over him in childhood, one he had not thought of in years. "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." John 14:27. And for the first time since the war, Boone believed the words might be true. The morning came sharp and clear, the desert washed clean by the storm. For a while, Boone let himself believe in the silence, in the soft creak of the windmill and the low groan of cattle in the corral. Ayanna was outside, standing carefully in the yard for the first time, her bare feet brushing against the sand as though she wasn't sure the ground would hold her. Boone leaned on the porch post, arms folded. He watched her trace the rim of the old stone well, her lips moving in quiet words he did not understand.
Apache, soft and rhythmic, like a song carried on wind. For a fleeting moment, he thought of what it might mean to have peace again. The sound of hooves shattered it. Boone stiffened, hand going instinctively to the rifle propped near the door. Ayanna froze, her eyes snapping to the ridgeline beyond the corral. 3 riders appeared against the pale sky, their horses' dark silhouettes moving slow and steady. They came down the slope with practiced ease, dust curling behind them like a banner. The man at the front raised a hand in greeting, though the smile that followed carried no warmth. "Mornin'," he called as they drew near. His voice was smooth, but cold as steel. "Name's Prescott." Boone stepped down from the porch, rifle resting but ready in his grip. "Ain't many folks ride this far without reason." Prescott tilted his head, pulling a folded paper from his coat. He held it up, the crude sketch visible even at a distance, sharp cheekbones, wild eyes. The same poster Boone had hidden days ago. "We're looking for someone," Prescott said. "Dangerous Apache girl, escaped a week back. Last seen near these parts." Boone took the paper without flinching, studied it for a beat, then handed it back. "Ain't seen her." Prescott's smile widened, though his eyes stayed hard. "That's so. Funny thing, the trail led right here." The air thickened. Ayanna had vanished from the yard, slipping back into the cabin's shadows. Boone shifted slightly, blocking the doorway with his frame. "Trails can lie," Boone said flatly. One of Prescott's men snorted, but the marshal only studied Boone, eyes narrowed as though he were measuring the man, weighing truth against silence. At last he tipped his hat. "Maybe you're right," he said, "but me and my men, we don't much like being lied to. We'll be back." They turned their horses and rode off slow, dust trailing long behind them. But the silence they left was heavier than before, pressing hard against Boone's chest. When he stepped back inside, Ayanna stood near the window, eyes dark with fear and fire. Boone leaned the rifle against the wall, his jaw set. "They'll return," she said. "I know." Her voice shook, but her gaze did not. "You could hand me over. End it now." Boone looked at her, steady and unyielding. "Not while I've still got breath in me." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the desert stretched endless and empty, but Boone knew now that silence no longer meant safety. It meant the shadow of Prescott was already closing in. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me on this journey.
The discovery came not with thunder, but with silence. It was near midnight when Ayanna stirred from restless sleep. Boone had stepped outside to check the corral, leaving the cabin in the hush of firelight. She rose quietly, drawn not by suspicion, but by the weight of curiosity. For days she had felt something unspoken lingering in his eyes, a shadow that was not hers but his. Her gaze drifted to the shed at the edge of the yard. The door hung slightly ajar, swaying on its hinge with the desert wind. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and stepped into the cool night. Inside, the air smelled of oil and dust. Tools lined the walls, saddles stacked in corners. But it was the floorboard beneath the workbench that caught her eye, a plank worn differently than the rest. She knelt, fingers sliding beneath the edge, and lifted. Beneath, wrapped in oilskin, lay a small box. Her breath caught as she opened it. A badge gleamed faintly in the lantern light. Union blue, dulled with age, but still sharp with authority. Beside it lay a blood-stained letter, the ink blurred by time, yet legible enough to wound. Orders carried out. The village burned.
Resistance minimal. Her hands trembled. The weight of it was heavier than any rope, heavier than the sign they had hung above her head. Footsteps sounded behind her. Boone filled the doorway, broad shoulders dark against the moonlight. His eyes fell to the open box, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked afraid. "You were there," she whispered, her voice low but cutting. Boone's jaw clenched. He stepped inside slowly, as though the ground itself were fragile. "I didn't light the fire." His voice was rough, heavy with gravel. But I didn't stop it. I was there. I saw it all. The lantern flickered between them, painting his face in harsh lines. "You wore their badge," she said, holding it up. Her hand shook, not from weakness now, but from rage. "You carried their orders." Boone's eyes did not leave hers. "And I carry the shame still." For a moment, silence pressed down like the desert sky. Ayanna's chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, her eyes burning. She could not decide whether to weep or strike him. "This whole time," she whispered, "you hid it." He took a step closer, though she recoiled. "I wasn't hiding. I was trying to bury it." "But some graves never stay closed." Her hand lowered, the badge slipping from her fingers to the dirt floor with a dull clang. Between them now lay not only truth, but a line no one could cross without consequence. The storm outside had passed, but inside that shed, the point of no return had come. The air in the shed was heavy, thick with dust and secrets. The badge lay between them, glinting faintly where it had fallen, as though mocking every word that might come after. "You wore their colors," Ayanna said. Her voice was raw, shaking but steady enough to wound. "The men who burned my village, who strung me up like an animal. You were one of them." Boone stood rigid, hands at his sides, his shadow tall against the wall. His face bore the same look she had seen once before, the look of a man standing in fire, unable to move. "I was there," he said finally, his words ground out like stones. "I didn't strike the match, but I didn't stop it either. I kept my mouth shut, told myself I was following orders, and when the smoke cleared, I walked away." Her eyes flared. "And now you sit here, offering me food, giving me shelter." "You think that erases it?" Boone's voice cracked, low but fierce. "No, nothing erases it. I've carried that night with me every step since. Every face, every scream. I see it when I close my eyes." His chest heaved, breath ragged. "I'm not saving anyone. I'm trying to atone." The words cut through the silence, but they did not soften her. Ayanna's jaw tightened. She wrapped her arms around herself as though she could shield her heart from the weight of his confession. "You watched my family burn," she whispered, more to the shadows than to him. "And you lived." Boone's eyes dropped, his voice little more than a rasp. "I wish I hadn't. More nights than I can count, I wished I'd fallen there, with them. But God left me breathing. Maybe so I could face this moment." She turned from him, her hair falling like a curtain to hide her face. Her shoulders shook, but no tears came. Only the sound of her breath, sharp and shallow. Boone took a step closer, but stopped short. His hands curled into fists. "You can hate me," he said. "You should. But don't think I'll stop standing between you and them. Not now, not ever." Ayanna spun back, her eyes blazing. "You think I need you to stand for me? You think that makes you clean?" Her voice rang through the shed, fierce and broken all at once. Boone did not answer. He only stood, bearing the full weight of her fury, as though it was the only penance left to him. The silence that followed was sharper than any blade. Finally, Ayanna bent, scooped the badge from the dirt, and hurled it at his feet. The metal clattered, echoing through the walls. "Then you carry it," she spat. "Carry it until it breaks you." She stormed past him into the night, leaving Boone alone with the flickering lantern, the blood-stained letter, and the badge that refused to be buried. The dawn broke pale, carrying with it the kind of silence that warns of something coming. Boone stood outside the barn, leaning against the post with weary eyes, his body still heavy with the weight of the night before. Ayanna had not spoken to him since she hurled the badge at his feet. She moved about the cabin with the stiffness of someone building walls faster than they could be torn down. The sound of hooves shattered that silence. Boone straightened, his hand tightening on the rifle slung at his shoulder. Dust curled on the ridge beyond, thick and rising like smoke. One rider became 3, 3 became 10, then 20. They came in a slow line, rifles glinting, banners of dust trailing long in the morning light. At their head rode Prescott, tall in the saddle, his gray duster flowing, his eyes cold as flint. He tipped his hat as though arriving at a friendly call. "Mornin', Boone," he called, voice carrying smooth and sharp across the distance. "I do admire a man who can lie with a straight face. But you see, lies don't hold weight out here. Trails do, and every trail says she's here." Boone stepped forward, planting himself firmly before the cabin. "You've wasted your ride. Ain't no one here fits that poster." Prescott's smile curled, all teeth and no warmth. He held the poster high, letting the wind snap it. "Funny thing, when you hang 100 of these across every saloon wall from Santa Fe to Tucson, men start watching, start talking, and they all point here." From inside the cabin, the faint creak of floorboards betrayed Ayanna's movement. Boone shifted subtly, keeping himself between Prescott and the doorway. Prescott's gaze narrowed. "You know what happens to a man who harbors a fugitive? The law don't look kindly on it. Some might call it treason." He let the word hang, heavy and deliberate. "And treason's a hanging crime." Boone's grip on the rifle tightened, but he did not raise it. His voice was steady. "Law's got no business here, Prescott. This is just hate with a badge." For the first time, Prescott's smile faltered. His jaw twitched. "Careful, Boone. I've hung men for less." The air grew thick, the kind that pressed hard against the lungs. Behind Boone, the cabin door opened. Ayanna stepped into the light, her face calm, but her eyes fierce. She moved to stand beside him, bare feet planted in the dust. "You could leave," Boone whispered out of the corner of his mouth. "I won't stop you." Her reply was quiet, but it carried with the force of the desert wind. "I stay, not for safety, for truth, for you." Prescott barked a laugh. "Ain't that sweet? The Apache girl defends her savior. But let me tell you something, Boone. You ain't her savior. You're just another fool ready to die for nothing." Ayanna stepped closer to Boone, her voice clear, sharp as flint. "Then let's show them what forgiveness looks like." The line had been drawn. There was no turning back. The standoff broke with the crack of a rifle. No one could say who fired first. Maybe one of Prescott's men, maybe Boone himself. But in an instant the desert morning exploded into thunder. Bullets tore through the corral fence, splintering wood into the dust. Boone dove for cover behind the water trough, his rifle barking back. Prescott's men fanned out, their horses screaming, rifles flashing in the rising sun. "Inside!" Boone shouted, but Ayanna did not retreat. She crouched low, her dark eyes burning, scanning the ground until her hand found the revolver he had laid aside days before. She gripped it with trembling fingers, then steadied herself. Boone caught the movement from the corner of his eye. "Don't!" he began, but the word was lost to the roar of gunfire. Ayanna rose just enough to see over the trough and pulled the trigger. The shot cracked the air, sending one of Prescott's riders reeling from his saddle. For a heartbeat, she froze, staring at what she had done. Then her jaw set hard, and she fired again. The ranch had become a battlefield. Windows shattered, dust swirled thick, the windmill creaked madly as bullets pinged off its frame. Boone fought with grim precision, each shot measured, each breath ragged. But numbers told their story, 20 against 2.
A flash of pain seared his side. Boone staggered, the rifle slipping from his grasp as blood spread dark across his shirt. He fell back against the barn wall, teeth clenched, vision swimming. "Elias!" Ayanna screamed. She scrambled to him, dropping behind the wall as bullets chipped the wood above their heads. She pressed her hand to his wound, crimson seeping through her fingers. His face was pale, sweat glistening on his brow. "Ain't the first time," he rasped with a weak grin. "Stay awake," she snapped, her voice shaking but fierce. She tore fabric from her skirt, pressing it against the wound, her hand steady despite the storm raging around them. Another bullet slammed into the barn door. She snatched his rifle, her arm straining against its weight. For a moment she hesitated, then she braced it on the windowsill and fired. The shot rang true, scattering 2 riders back down the ridge. "Blessed are the merciful," she whispered under her breath, the words trembling as she loaded again, "for they shall obtain mercy." Matthew 5:7. Boone blinked at her, dazed but hearing every word. The gunfire raged on, but in its heart something had shifted. Ayanna was no longer just the girl he had cut down from the tree. She was standing in the fire with him, not as a burden, but as his equal. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the battle faltered. Prescott barked orders, pulling his men back, regrouping. The dust began to settle, leaving the ranch scarred, the air thick with the stench of gunpowder and blood. Boone slumped against the wall, fighting for breath. Ayanna knelt beside him, her hands stained red, her eyes blazing with defiance. They had survived, for now, but the war was far from over. They left the ranch under a veil of dust and smoke, slipping through the canyons as the last echoes of gunfire faded into the morning. Boone leaned heavy against the saddle, his shirt soaked dark, every breath a labor. Ayanna guided the mule with one hand, the other pressed firm against his wound, her face set in grim determination. By nightfall, they found refuge, a narrow hollow carved into the rock, hidden by thorn brush. A trickle of water seeped from the stone, enough for their thirst, enough for her to wash the blood from her hands. She spread a blanket on the ground and lowered him onto it, her heart pounding as his face paled in a firelight. "Stay with me," she whispered, grinding herbs she had carried in a small pouch. She pressed the poultice to his side, tying it fast with strips torn from her own dress. Boone hissed but did not flinch. He stared at the flames, jaw clenched, eyes clouded. Then, in a voice low and raw, he said, "I used to wear that badge with pride. Thought it meant I was a man of honor. But honor don't smell like smoke and burned flesh. It don't sound like children crying." His breath rattled. "I shut my eyes and told myself I didn't see it, but I did. God help me, I saw it all." Ayanna paused, her hands trembling on the bandage. His words were not new, she had known his guilt, but now they came stripped bare, without defense, without excuse. "You carry it still," she said softly. He turned his head, meeting her eyes. "I carry it every day, and I reckon I'll carry it to my grave." "But cutting you down from that tree," his voice cracked, "it was the first thing I'd done in years that felt right." The firelight flickered between them, painting shadows across his face, gaunt and lined with pain. "I don't ask forgiveness," he whispered. "I don't deserve it." For a long moment she said nothing. Only the night spoke, crickets in the brush, the faint drip of water from the stone. Then she reached across the blanket and took his hand. His skin was rough, cold, but alive. "You are not who you were," she said, her voice steady now, "and neither am I." His eyes glistened, though no tears fell. He squeezed her hand weakly, as though clinging to a lifeline he had never thought would be offered. They sat that way through the night, two wounded souls bound not by blood or vengeance, but by the fragile thread of mercy. When dawn broke, Boone still breathed. The wound had not claimed him.
And though the desert stretched vast and merciless around them, for the first time he felt the weight of his shame begin to shift. Not gone, but shared. 3 weeks passed before Boone's wound began to knit. He walked with a limp now, leaning heavy on a carved stick, but his eyes were clear again, his breath strong. Together he and Ayanna rode south, the mule slow but steady beneath the desert sun. Beyond the border hills, they found what seemed like a dream, a village hidden in the folds of rock, where mesquite trees shaded adobe homes and smoke curled lazily from clay chimneys. Half Apache, half Mexican, the people lived quiet, tucked away from maps and soldiers. At first, suspicion met them. Men gripped their tools like weapons, children darted behind their mothers. But when an elder woman stepped forward, her eyes lingered on Ayanna. She spoke in a tongue Boone did not know, but Ayanna answered, voice trembling. Ayanna, Firebird Clan. The woman's lined face softened into a smile. Then come home. For the first time in years, Ayanna breathed without fear. She worked in the healing tent, grinding herbs, binding wounds, telling stories that the children gathered to hear. Boone mended fences, taught young men how to shoe horses, and found himself welcomed, slowly, cautiously, by men who watched his hands more than his words. At night, when the fire crackled in the plaza, Ayanna would sit beside him, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. In those moments, Boone almost believed they had outrun the past. But the desert does not forget. It began with the distant curl of smoke on the horizon. At first, Boone thought it the mark of a shepherd's fire. But the line grew thicker, blacker, rising with purpose. He stood at the edge of the village, jaw tight, eyes narrowing against the glare of the setting sun. "They found us," he muttered. Ayanna came to his side, her hand brushing his arm. She followed his gaze and saw it too, the smoke of riders on the march. The villagers gathered, murmurs rippling like wind through dry grass. Boone turned to them, his voice steady though his heart thundered. "It's Prescott. He won't stop till he's taken her, or me." Ayanna stepped forward, her voice clear, ringing across the plaza. "He strung me up once, called me guilty before I could speak. But I am not the girl they left to die. I am Ayanna of the Firebird Clan. My name was burned, but I was not consumed." The elder nodded slowly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then we will stand with you." The smoke thickened, curling higher into the reddening sky. Boone gripped his rifle, the weight familiar, the wood worn by years of regret. He glanced at Ayanna beside him, her bow strung, her eyes fierce. There would be no more running. The storm was coming, and this time they would meet it head on. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. The smoke arrived before the men. By dusk, the horizon glowed red, not from sunset, but from torches. Boone stood at the gate of the village, rifle in hand, watching the dust rise like a tide of war. Beside him, Ayanna held a bow strung tight with sinew and steel, her stance calm, her eyes fierce. The villagers gathered behind them, men with axes and shovels, women carrying stones, even children peering wide-eyed from the shadows. They were not soldiers, but they were not strangers to fear. They knew what it meant when riders came bearing fire. Prescott rode in first, his gray duster snapping in the wind, his horse black as night. A dozen armed men followed, rifles gleaming in torchlight. He dismounted slowly, his boots striking the dirt with deliberate weight. "You thought you could disappear," Prescott said, his voice carrying across the still plaza. "Hide behind women and children, but there's no hiding from the law." Boone stepped forward, planting himself between Prescott and the village. His rifle was leveled, steady despite the ache in his side. "You ain't the law," he said, voice low but sharp. "You're just hate wearing a badge."
Prescott sneered. "Call it what you will, but I have orders. The girl belongs to me. Step aside, Boone, or I'll cut you down where you stand." Ayanna's voice rang out then, strong and clear. "The girl you hunt is dead. She died the day you left her swinging from that tree." She lifted her chin, eyes blazing. "I am Ayanna of the Firebird clan. You cannot hang what has already burned and risen again." A murmur rippled through Prescott's men. One of the younger riders shifted uneasily, lowering his rifle. "She was just a girl," he muttered. "That sign, what we did, it wasn't justice." Prescott wheeled on him, fury blazing. "You questioning me, boy?" Another rider spoke, his voice heavy. "We didn't ride out here to kill a woman who heals children and feeds the hungry. Boone's right. This ain't law, it's vengeance." The ranks wavered. Prescott's face twisted, rage blotting out his charm. He raised his rifle, pointing it straight at Ayanna. "Traitors," he spat, "you'll all hang with her." The moment stretched thin, every breath caught in waiting. Boone's rifle came up, faster than his wound should have allowed. His shot cracked the night. Prescott staggered, eyes wide in shock. The rifle slipped from his hands as blood blossomed across his chest. He fell to his knees, choking on disbelief, before collapsing into the dirt. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. The torches flickered, the horses stamped, but none of the men moved. Boone lowered his rifle, his breath ragged. "He was never the law," he said hoarsely. "He was just hate with a badge." Prescott's men looked at one another, their eyes no longer hard, but hollow. One by one, rifles dipped. Torches were dropped into the dirt. The fight had drained out of them, leaving only the truth they could no longer deny. Ayanna stepped forward, her bow still in hand, but her voice softer now. "Go, lay down your hate before it consumes you, too."
The Firebird does not rise for vengeance, it rises for life. One by one, the men mounted their horses. They did not speak, did not challenge. They rode out the way they had come, shadows fading into the desert. The village erupted in cries, not of fear, but of relief. Children ran to their mothers, men clasped one another's arms. The elder woman placed her hand on Ayanna's shoulder, her eyes shining with pride. Boone sank onto a bench by the gate, his rifle resting across his knees. Blood seeped from his side again, but his eyes were clear, his chest light. For the first time in years, he felt as though the fire that had haunted him had found its end. He looked at Ayanna, who stood tall beneath the night sky, her face aglow with firelight. She met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw not judgment, but the faint shimmer of forgiveness. The final battle had not been won with guns alone, it had been won with truth. The desert was quiet again. Days passed, and no riders returned. The wind that once carried smoke now bore only the scent of mesquite and river water. Boone sat at the edge of the village one morning, his limp steady but no longer crippling, the carved stick firm beneath his hand. His eyes followed the rising sun, its gold spilling across the canyons, and for the first time in years he felt the light did not judge him. Ayanna walked beside him, her hair catching the glow like strands of fire. In her hands she carried a small basket of herbs for the healing tent. She paused when she reached him, her gaze lingering on his face. "You look older," she said softly, though her voice carried warmth. Boone chuckled low, the sound rough but real. "Battle and age'll do that to a man." He turned to her, his eyes softening. "But I reckon peace makes him younger again." They returned to the village together. Boone had built them a home at the edge of the trees, a cabin of stone and wood, its beams carved with the Firebird crest. It was modest but strong, and within its walls they found something neither had believed possible: rest. Ayanna tended the garden each morning, planting herbs and painting symbols of renewal above the doorway. Boone worked with the horses, teaching the boys of the village how to ride quiet and saddle strong. At night, the two sat by their hearth, firelight painting the walls, their silence no longer heavy but easy, like a familiar hymn. One evening, Ayanna hung two items above the mantel. The first was a rope cut and burned at the ends, its fibers frayed but preserved. The second was a painting she made herself, a bird rising through flame, wings spread, fire beneath its feathers. Boone watched her as she worked. "Why keep the rope?" he asked. She touched the charred fibers gently. "Because it reminds me what I survived, and what you chose that day." "And the bird?" he pressed. She smiled faintly. "Because it reminds me what we became." Boone's eyes lingered on the symbols, and for a moment he saw not just pain, but redemption etched into the walls of his home. The months passed. Boone's limp remained, but so did his strength. Ayanna's laughter returned, rare but bright, carrying across the plaza like bells. The villagers began to look at them not with suspicion, but with trust. Boone felt the change each time a boy ran up to him with a saddle strap to mend, or an elder shared bread at his table. One morning, Ayanna joined him by the river. The water shimmered in the dawnlight, running cool over the stones. She took his hand and placed it gently on her belly. Boone froze, his weathered face breaking into something between shock and wonder. "A child?" His voice cracked. Ayanna nodded, her smile tender. "Our child." He turned away, eyes burning with tears he had not allowed for years. His hand trembled as he cupped hers, pressing it against the new life stirring within her. "I never thought I'd have a second chance," he whispered. Ayanna leaned into him, her voice steady as the river. "You didn't. You made one." They stood there, watching the water flow, the future stretching before them like the horizon itself. That night, Boone opened the old Bible he had carried, but never read since the war. By the fire, he turned its brittle pages until his finger stopped on a verse. His voice was low but firm as he read aloud. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future." Jeremiah 29:11. Ayanna listened, her hand resting on his, her eyes bright with quiet tears. In that cabin, over the fire they had built together, the rope and the firebird hung side by side, a testament not only to the ashes of the past, but to the flames of rebirth. The West would remember many things: gunfights, lawmen, outlaws, and battles lost. But for Boone and Ayanna, the desert would remember something greater. It would remember that even in the harshest corners of history, love could rise from ash like a flame that refused to die. Stories like Boone and Ayanna's are more than tales of survival. They are mirrors of our own journeys. We all carry wounds, regrets, and memories of choices we wish had gone differently. Yet, in the silence of loss, in the fire of trial, grace can still be found. Perhaps you, too, have known what it means to carry shame, or to be given a second chance you never thought possible. That is the heartbeat of the frontier, the reminder that redemption is as much a part of the West as dust and blood. If this story stirred something within you, if it reminded you that even in the hardest seasons, love can rise from ashes, then stay with us. Subscribe and share so others may find hope in these true Wild West stories, tales where bullets may miss but hearts never do.